Johnson's division, McNair's brigade, and most specifically, we're going to be looking at the action that takes place from the Confederate, largely from the Confederate perspective, here in the area of what is known as Poe Field, what then was known as Poe Field, the small farm rented by Larkin Poe, and a significant point on the battlefield, at least for the action that unfolds. So, in a few minutes, we'll leave here, and we are going to go down onto Battle Line Road once again for our start. This time, we want to park. Actually, I guess we want to park about the same place. Yeah. So we want to go to the area of the Texas Monument along Glen Kelly Road, and whoever winds up leading the column down there, right there is the pavement widens out. There's a paved area there for parking. Please don't park beyond the end of that widened out pavement for parking, because that'll start to get into the area that we want to actually discuss and analyze. So from kind of directly opposite the Texas Monument there, and then back up Battle Line Road.
So not as far down as the Alabama Monument.
Right, not as far down as the Alabama Monument, yeah. Not as far down as even the curve there. Turchin's sector is actually part of the story, and so we want to try to be able to see that and understand that. But we'll be talking about action of mid to late morning and into the afternoon of September the 20th. So, you want to add, Mr. Powell?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Well, we will reconvene on Battle Line Road. But as I always like to point out, Battle Line Road, which is not a historic road, it was a road that literally early visitors to the Chickamauga Battlefield Unit of the National Military Park beat into the terrain, because along this, along what becomes the road is what? Monuments. All these monuments. And people wanting to see the monuments, driving their carriages, riding their horses, literally began to beat a road into the landscape, and the Park Commission eventually acquiesced and turned it into a road, Battle Line Road. But for right now, remove the road from your thinking, and look both north and south, and what you really see is that we are standing near the crest of a low rise of ground that is basically parallel with the low rise of ground on which the Lafayette Road runs. Those of you all who were with us this morning, as we advanced out to the east, I stopped and said that in general, you've heard me describe how the terrain, terraces or stair steps down ever lower to the east to West Chickamauga Creek, and that's happening here as well. The rise on which the Lafayette Road is located is slightly higher than this rise of ground. And the one where Jackson and Maney's line is, that we were on this morning, that's lower than this one is, all going down to the creek. During the course of September the 19th, as Thomas fought Brannan's, Baird's, Palmer's, Johnson's, Reynolds divisions out there to the east, and realized just how extended that line was becoming, and of course our discussion this morning about Johnson and Villex and Dodge's concerns about their flanks is illustrative of that. Thomas, as he rode repeatedly from the south end of the Kelly Field, the Kelly Crossroads area, which can be said to be Thomas's headquarters, as he rode repeatedly from that area out to the rear of the action to the east to be able to keep track of what was going on, he recognized that here in the woods, just to the east of the Kelly Field, was the crest of a low rise of ground. And as that line to the east became more and more extended and attenuated, Thomas, by mid-afternoon, begins to think that we need to find a better position. And even before, in the latter part of the afternoon, during a lull out there on his line, he brings Baird and Richard Johnson back here and shows them this low rise of ground. When Palmer's division withdrew in front of Stewart's attack and then became disengaged as Stewart is repulsed in the south end of the Poe Field, Palmer's men move back just a little bit, and as darkness settles on the battlefield, the remains of Palmer's three brigades, Hazen, Cruft, and Gross, are reconstituting here in the south end of the Kelly Field. Turchin's brigade from Reynolds' division is doing the same thing, and there are the assets, and Johnson and Baird have orders to pull back at dark as well. And what Thomas wants to do is start building a new line based on this low rise of ground. When Baird and Johnson, or when Johnson begins to pull back, and then Cleburne attacks, the forming of this new line is going to be briefly delayed, but also assisted by Cleburne's attack. When Cleburne strikes primarily Johnson, but also Baird out there to the east in the Winfrey Field area and just south of Winfrey Field, what do you think Thomas thought Baird and Johnson needed? Support, reinforcements, right? Okay, are there any available? There are?
Brannan and Baird.
Baird. Down that way.
Baird's available.
Well, Baird's out there. He's on Johnson's left.
What about McCook and
Palmer? Palmer in this field. And Palmer is ordered to march out and join the fight to the east. And Palmer gets his three brigades formed up, and they start marching into the woods here. And there, at the time, there was the road that came from the Lafayette Road that went up onto the low rise and then off to the east. They start following that. About that time, Cleburne, the attack out, or the Federals, Johnson and Baird, disengage out there and pull back. Where now are Cruft, Hazen's, and Gross's brigades? On the crest of the low rise of ground. And Johnson and Baird then fall back to the crest of the low rise to the north. And initially, Palmer extended further to the south here, but the new line begins to be formed. And overnight, this line begins to take more shape, and eventually the troops are going to begin building the field fortifications that will be so much a part of this line, and we start to then have the line of September the 20th. This line is going to be formed by some purposeful actions, and then also by some events that just unfold, like Johnson and Baird disengaging from Cleburne, and no, there not being the need for Palmer out there. And where is Palmer at that moment of disengaging? Already on the crest of the rise. So, but this line begins to be formed, and as it does, where does Thomas want to continue this line? Well, up to his left and to his right. And in just a moment, we're going to go see whether or not he's able to do that, at least to his right. Anything you want to add here?
We know which Stewart hadn't pushed it to it, he would have been.
He's stretching off to the north, and of course, most of you all know that the Union line here bends or folds around the south end of the Kelly Field. Well, that's the way it becomes. That's not the way it was originally intended, or at least originally hoped. They originally expected to be able to extend the line further south along the crest of the low rise. But about 600 yards to the south of where we are right now, there are Confederates on the low rise. Alexander Peter Stewart's division repulsed from the action of the afternoon of September the 19th. We've got a car coming up behind us. And so they cannot extend the line indefinitely, really much further south than right here. And this is one of the factors for why then the Union line at this point eventually curves around the south end of the Kelly Field, crosses the Lafayette Road, and runs south on the west side of the Lafayette Road.
That was mine.
Line acknowledging the presence of the Confederates to the south, as this line begins to be formed in this area, it had a different formation than what we normally think of as this curve around the south end of the Kelly Field. David, do you want to talk about that part?
Yeah. How many of you know what the word crochet means? How many of you have crocheted? Well, crochet is what's happening here. Instead of connecting the two lines, or instead of curving the line back and then straightening it, what Turchin has done is his line extends here and ends facing this way, and then Joseph Reynolds, King's Brigade of Joseph Reynolds, forms in on the other side of the Lafayette Road, also facing this way. So there's a gap and an overlap. So if this is Turchin's line, this is King's line. And the way to defend against a crochet, or the way a crochet defends against an attack, if the enemy comes from here, well, they're attacking your front. But if they move south to try and attack you, dot your, or cross your T, attack your flank, they will be exposing their flank to that other line back there. Crochet is a French military term. It's not used very often. I mean, there are still obvious weaknesses. You don't have a continuous line, but you also don't create a point where your line is facing this way. If the enemy attacks at the point, you create a potential vulnerability. So it's one of the techniques of essentially 19th century linear warfare. It's about creating interlocking fields of fire and protecting flanks, what today we would call covering our flanks through fire, as opposed to a defensive line.
And in the Atlanta campaign, where both sides become very proficient in the use of field fortifications, you see the extensive use of covering ground by fire, or denying ground to the enemy by your fire covering it, without lines actually connecting across that piece of ground.
There are many pieces of terrain that if you just dug a continuous trench line, they're too low, they would be exposed to other enemy fire, artillery fire. But if you can cover it by your own fire, then anybody who advances into that cul-de-sac, that kill-sac as it were, will not be able to progress. You defend by fields of fire.
There are instances of it at Resaca on the Confederate line on the state park property there. That is open and accessible now. There are lots of instances at Kennesaw Mountain on the surviving lines there, where the lines are not necessarily continuous, particularly through low ground, where they can then, from higher ground on either side, they can put fire to deny enemy access into that low ground.
It's mostly useful for covering low ground, and there is some low ground down here that perhaps they're trying to cover.
So was any of Church's men facing south, or are they all facing this direction?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Right. Initially, they are all facing just to the east, and in fact, King's men on the other side of the road are facing east also, and literally the line is just stair-stepped or echelon to the right rear. So.
Well, if that's a big if, I know. If the enemy could coordinate it though, you attack that guy, and then he's busy. Then you bring up this way, but that would be a difficult coordination. I know.
Potentially, yes.
Linear warfare.
Yeah.
You can't figure out how to move, this line forward and this line.
It takes some coordination.
Yes.
Yeah, and that didn't very.
And as we will see, the Confederates who cross this field and attack that line will run into both infantry and artillery fire. They won't be able to stay there.
Does this type of arrangement invite friendly fire, or is the distance great enough to avoid that?
It's a potential problem.
Yes, right. And Turchin's right does overlap the left of King on the other side of the Lafayette Road by some degree or amount, and so the troops on King's left over there have to be cautioned about the direction of their fire. So, but yeah, there is that that concern, that potential. So.
King's northernmost units will be able to, or will be directed to fire obliquely into the
right
field,
front, yeah.
which also is an added advantage because Confederates attacking them linearly across the field will be also exposed to a flanking fire.
Now,
King only has one group of soldiers.
Yes,
at this moment should have all four of his regiments
all
at this
four
moment.
regiments are there.
Well, okay. On this general map, David doesn't break King down into regiments.
You're looking at the brigade map.
Yeah, that's Turchin's in two lines. His 5 regiments are in 2 lines.
There was no extra artillery flank and stuff like that.
Well, King's battery is positioned to.
Brigade artillery.
Brigade artillery is positioned to be able to fire into there. So.
Yes.
So on map, the second map in the handout, or map 10.6, you can see King and his 105th Ohio, 75th Indiana, 101st Indiana, and 68th Indiana. They're all shown online. So, yeah. Well, King's right connects to Croxton's left.
And then south of Croxton is Connell. You don't see it on this map.
Okay, yeah.
It's cropped off.
And then
but
between Connell and Hill is nothing.
Between Connell's, or to the south of Connell, you first have Negley's division, and then they're relieved by Wood's division with Barnes's brigade attached. But of course you've got that fluid motion in there, and And Connell complains a couple of times that there was nobody on his right, and he's not incorrect about pointing that out, because he is literally watching units go past him, moves.
Move to the north.
Okay, so you all now know far more about the Union line than the Confederates did on the morning of September the 20th. In fact, I have to ask you to forget all of what you've just learned. Because now we're going to go learn what the Confederates learn about this this line. So,
Hopefully with fewer casualties.
yeah, hopefully with fewer casualties. So remember Turchin's line stretching north here up to about where our string of cars begins, and they're facing out to the east, and back there across the road is King's Brigade, and then Cruxton and Connell of Brannan, they're facing east as well. So you've got that kind of stair step in the lines.
They've moved the cannons to the front
On the third map,
on the second one.
Yes, there is artillery in the line across Poe Field, if that's what you're asking. Yes.
So they have no protection to the front. Somebody,
Well, they're supported by infantry.
they're supported
There's
by-
not infantry in front of them, so they can fire.
Okay, because this morning, the artillery was behind.
Well, that's because they were advancing. Now they're on the defense.
yeah.
Ah.
And so the 21st Indiana Battery of Turchin is up on the front line now, in the middle of the brigade front lines.
So the guy running around to the front to clean the barrel.
He's exposed, yes. Yeah,
Fully exposed.
yeah.
Are you asking for that job?
No,
He's like carry the ammo, then load the gun.
Okay. Full-time skirmish battalion. This is one that has been created by the state of Georgia, and is in now Bates Brigade of Stewart's division. Just a small formation, but they are supposed to be the full-time skirmishers of Bates Brigade. And they will serve that role at different times in the battle. And then their initial deployment in the brigade line, they are on the right of the brigade line. And then when they need to deploy as skirmishers, they would go forward, open the order, and deploy as skirmishers in front of the brigade line, and go out and feel for the enemy, or try to hold the enemy at bay as long as possible. But the other reason I pause here relative to this is in the case of most of the monuments and markers, when you were looking at the front of them, the face on which the primary inscription is that identifies it, you would be facing the faces of the men in the ranks. The front of the unit, the men, would be facing in that direction. Doesn't this look like a little odd position right here? It's at right angles almost to what? The Union line. Are they turning the flank of Turchin's line?
Are they refused?
They're guarding the flank. And we'll hear more about that as Bates' attack actually unfolds. But remember this marker in the direction that it is facing as we go forward with the description of Bates' attack. I'll try to remember to mention it again to remind you how they are deployed on the right to protect Bates' right.
This is another specific mission of the skirmisher battalions, the sharpshooters. If you don't have flank support, if you don't have somebody on your flank extending your line, if trouble comes from that way, you at least want to be aware of it. And so you might take your skirmishers, either have one of your regiments throw out skirmishers to one side, or if you have a dedicated sharpshooter battalion, use them, and they get used this way a lot.
This unit was originally commanded by Major Caswell, but he is wounded on September the 19th. Command then fell to Captain Turner, but he's also going to be wounded. And for most of the time on the 20th, Lieutenant Joel Towers is going to command the battalion. Is Towers as an experienced and good leader as Captain Turner theoretically?
No.
Theoretically, no. Is he as good as Major Caswell? Theoretically, no. Now, it might turn out that he might be, but theoretically, the leadership of this regiment is with the, or this battalion is with the major. But he's been wounded on the 19th. And
he's more effective right now than what Caswell can be because he's not here.
correct. So,
Because he's not here.
yes. So just remember that this unit is not under its regular normal commander. That command has to send it down the chain of command. And I'm sorry,
Stringer.
Yep. So might that leadership be as good?
Their nickname is the Wildcats. I like these guys.
Jim, is that a mistake there, 11:30 p.m.? Am I reading that?
Good to have a bunch of guys like that around.
I've always interpreted it as
Yeah,
a mistake.
yeah, that should be AM. So yeah, get my hammer and chisel out. So there you go.
Yeah.
Turn that T into an A.
Just before Long Street.
Note of this Woods Brigade tablet, and we'll talk more about what it talks about here in a few minutes. But just note where it is located, and relative to Turchin's line and the Alabama monument. And we'll talk more about Wood's actual attack here in a few minutes. Been trained, but Rosecrans is a real innovator, yes. But then you've got these, there's 6 or 7 companies of them that basically are doing nothing. So it's
Sometimes it's simply a matter of the commander likes the bright and shiny stuff and you keep it nearby.
So I pause here for just a moment we've been walking south along the crest of the low rise, and remember I said the Federals could not extend their line further south along the crest of the low rise because eventually to the south Confederates were on the crest of the low rise. And look ahead of you down the trail. What do you see down there? Some cannon and some markers and tablets. And when Thomas is first forming that line up there, the Confederates on this low rise were still further south than where those markers are. But make a mental note of their existence, because they're going to come into our discussion real heavily here in just a moment at our next stop, so, which is not far from here. These 2, 3, 4, 5 tablets for a given brigade to make sure you proofread the right text against the right pattern as it's laid out. This was a way to identify it. And then, since even in the 1890s there were people who didn't know much history of the Civil War, is this a Yankee tablet or a Rebel tablet? Yeah, it is. Yeah, a C up here in the corner.
Some of them don't have that.
No, there is no consistency, and you'll find you might find 40 on 2 or 3 others here. This is just a batch control number.
Okay.
And
From the foundry?
from the Park Commission. So in this batch sent to the foundry to be cast, have the patterns made and to be cast. There were probably at least 40 tablets in that batch.
Or maybe even 41.
Yeah, or right, or even 41. And to make sure that you proofread the right text against the right pattern. This was just a cross check for that. So
Weld the letters on
I'm sorry?
at the foundry?
No, this is cast.
Okay.
So at the foundry, and if you learn this skill right now, you can learn lots and earn lots and lots of money. There are almost no pattern makers left in the United States economy. When we have had tablets recast in the last 25 years, 3/4 of the cost has been whatever the pattern maker charged, and we had to accept whatever the pattern maker charged because there are so few pattern makers anymore. But literally they'd take a board, or in the 1890s it would be multiple boards all put together, and the letters in the 1890s, there were a lot more, as you can see as you look at a number of these. There were lots of different fonts and sizes and all kinds of different letters, but they literally are going to glue those pattern letters down backwards on that board. No, I'm sorry, down correctly on that board. So you would literally glue those letters down to form what looked like this tablet on that board. And then, once that was done, then you would make a mold with that by putting that in a box, packing foundry sand into it. And John, how many feet of foundry sand have you dug through in your relic hunting days? So,
We'll use more of it. Pouring concrete,
Yeah.
building bit, when
Yep.
I work construction. But yeah, I've dug through that stuff too.
yeah,
That's
but
what I'm saying.
they pound that sand in there. They lift that sand pattern off, and now in reverse in the sand you have all of those letters. In fact, we might even find a place on one of these where the some of the sand broke away before they cast it. They'd make the other side, and then literally they would pour molten cast iron into it to cast this tablet.
I ain't down there at 37th Tennessee, they ground off.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah. Here's an example. Here's an error of some sort. And in this case, the easy thing to do was to just grind those words off rather than recast the whole thing. So, and I can tell you that.
Or is that referring to Tyler just running both of them? Maybe the other guy.
Over there, it's
Well,
Friday
yeah.
night.
Two guys must have got
Well-
wounded.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but this was morning, and that's after, or
Yeah,
late
and over
now.
here they got
This
the
is first
fancy
position, that's
there.
second.
Well, let's see. This is morning, and Tyler is in command. But Tyler's going to be wounded in what we're about to talk about. And Lieutenant Colonel Dudley Frazier takes command, but then he is wounded, and the final commander of the 15th and 37th Tennessee Consolidated is Captain R.M. Tankersley. And so actually, this being afternoon, Tyler should not be on this one. He should be taken off because he had been wounded out in the morning. And that's the level of detail they tried to get on these often.
There's some newer ones, or I forget the battery, but it seems like there's some that have maybe been.
We've had to recast some.
Okay.
And
more modern.
since we began recasting some in the 1990s, a staff member who is now retired, Jim Sikowski, and I were the ones who were largely involved in that. And on the ones we have had to recast, we have tried to have cast into the back of it, recast and the year.
But Goodspeed, I think maybe his marker was a little different.
Yeah, I'd have to go back in and look. Sometimes you can actually, some of them actually have the original foundry cast into the back of it. Yeah, these don't, so okay, so we're now on a Confederate line. So you want to do how Stewart gets here?
Well, I'll do it fairly quickly.
Okay.
Essentially, Stewart starts out down there, and he put this in order. The morning attack plan for the Army of Tennessee on the morning of September 20th is that first the right is going to go forward. That's Polk's Corps. They're going to attack, and then as they break the Union position and push them south, the Confederate divisions are going in, Longstreet's divisions are going in next. But Stewart, when Stewart and Longstreet get together on the morning of the 20th, Stewart says, "There's nobody on my flank. I'm not connected with the right wing." And Longstreet also wants to create. He's got troops backed up too deep in his rear. He wants to move his own Hood's division, now under command of Law. Hood is commanding the corps while Longstreet commands the wing. He also wants to move the Texas Brigade, his troops that he brought from Virginia, into the front line to form the head of his assault column. So he orders Stewart to move north until Stewart connects with the right wing, and then he will insert Hood's division, which does not happen because other Confederate troops, Bushrod Johnson's division, doesn't get the word not to move, and so when A.P. Stewart starts to move north, Johnson follows suit. So Longstreet never gets what he wants, but the net effect up here is to shift A.P. Stewart's division several hundred yards to the north. And what Stewart doesn't realize or doesn't know is that he has now moved in front of, he's not connected with the Confederates of the right wing, in this case Cleburne's division. He's now moved in front of Deshler's brigade and at least part of Wood's brigade of Patrick Cleburne's division.
And this is early, and at that time, Deshler and Sam Wood are still well out there to the east. Stewart has literally moved up in front of them without knowing that.
So he's masked their advance and has created a problem for Patrick Cleburne,
as it turns out.
Yeah.
But when Stewart moved north along the crest of the low rise, he moved closer to what?
The Federals.
The Federals, yep. And as he moved along the crest of the low rise, and his skirmishers make contact with Federals up there, he gets concerned. If he just keeps his line on the crest of the rise up there, he could be easily attacked in flank. And so bait the commander of the right brigade of Stewart's division, Bate actually refuses the end of Stewart's line a little bit. He turns back at about a 45-degree angle off of the crest of the rise and runs down this slope into this this low ground. So these troops on this line now are basically facing towards the Federals in that area. But who's out there for the Confederates? Well, we know Cleburne's out there, but Bate doesn't know that. And so what do you think Bate is concerned about? His right flank. And guess where Caswell's battalion of sharpshooters gets sent? Out onto his right flank to protect that right flank. So Stewart's division has got Brown's brigade on the crest of the low rise down there, basically where you saw the cannon down there, and Bates' brigade coming down the slope here, and Clayton's Alabama brigade is going to be formed back behind. But they have shifted into this area.
That's why these tablets are here, for Bate and angled instead of up there on the line. On the line, yep. To represent that that refusing of the flank on Stewart's line, and it doesn't really show on these maps, but Bate himself says Sunday morning found us in line, assumed the night previous, and under the order of General Stewart, I moved my command to the right 500 or 600 yards and took position forward and on the right of General Brown's brigade. But in forming the line, was compelled to retire the right of my line to an angle of about 45 degrees on account of the proximity of the enemy located to my right oblique. Caswell's battalion of sharpshooters under Lieutenant Joel Towers, Captain Benjamin M. Turner, having been dangerously wounded the evening before. This was after Major Coswell had been wounded earlier on the 19th. Was thrown forward and deployed at right angles with my right to guard against a repetition of the movement of the previous evening to turn that flank to which we were liable, there being at the time no force sufficiently near to intervene. Having assumed this line, I had a temporary barricade of logs hastily constructed, which gave partial protection against the shower of grape, canister, and shell, which continuously and most angrily saluted us. During the time that we were subjected to this ordeal, several men and officers were killed and wounded, yet no restiveness or other evidence of demoralization was manifested in my brigade.
Where would this federal artillery fire have been from? The other side of Powell?
Well, some other side of Poe. Some of it, a little bit of it, is probably from up with the 21st Indiana Battery with Turchin, but you are correct. Most of it is going to be from the 19th Indiana Battery with King, Battery C, 1st Ohio Light Artillery with Cruxton, and Church's Battery D, 1st Michigan Light Artillery in Connell's line. So and some of the Confederate batteries on this line, like Dawson's Georgia Battery down here, they've been firing some because the skirmishers have gone out in front and made contact with the enemy, so there's a little bit of a skirmish fight going on. Some of the artillery gets into it as well. So, and both sides' artillery say they silence the other side's artillery. So. Okay.
Start to go next to wood.
Yep. So I guess we will. Again, make note of where these tablets are, and remember where we paused a few minutes ago with wood up there. Where is that tablet relative to the right of Stewart's division? It's essentially between us and the Federals up there. So.
But the 8th Georgia, the sharpshooter, or 4th Georgia, they hadn't got that far up
At
that time.
Not at that time, right? At this moment, the 4th Georgia is basically at right angles to the right flank, so they would be over here at this time.
They kind of wheeled to get where they went.
Well, when Bate eventually attacks, he is going to have to conduct essentially a quarter left wheel to be able to get lined up with the crest to advance in that direction. And at that time, then the 4th Georgia Battalion Sharpshooters, they're actually, he leaves them on the right flank of his brigade to cover his right flanks.
Just to give you a relative sense of the size of these formations, if you look on the second to last page where it says order of battle, notice that Wood's Brigade begins the battle with 1,982 men. That's a very large brigade in terms of Confederates. Now, all of these brigades that we're talking about have suffered casualties on the 19th, so they're not this big on the 19th. But Bates Brigade is under 1,000. Woods Brigade is probably still, I don't know, 1,600, 1,700, maybe a little more. They didn't suffer horribly in the night attack, though. They did take some casualties.
Bates says on the morning of the 20th, he has 95 officers and 735 men.
So 800. A little over 800. So Woods Brigade is going to be twice the size of Bates Brigade, and that's going to really impact in terms of how big a frontage they advance. So when we talk about Woods Brigade, remember that we're going to cover a wide front, and it's going to get wider because the regiments sort of split up.
All right.
Except for that.
This morning, many of you all probably noticed out there to the on the Jackson-Maney line, there was the Cleburne Division tablet for the end of Cleburne on the 19th and Cleburne on the morning of the 20th. Well, when Bragg's orders belatedly go down the chain, the two divisions who were supposed to attack first are Breckinridge's division and Cleburne's division. And they are to attack one right after the other. Breckinridge jump off, then Cleburne. But as Daniel Harvey Hill and Breckinridge and Cleburne now belatedly discuss amongst themselves the orders that they have just received from Bragg for a dawn attack, which is now more than an hour ago, while the men are eating, it is identified that there is a 400-yard gap between the right of Cleburne's division and the left of Breckinridge's division. So let's see if I can have a couple of volunteers. I'll get you to step forward, and you're going to be Helm's Brigade of Breckinridge's division. You're the left of Helm.
Just don't be Helm himself.
And so I need three more volunteers. So Daryl, I'll get you to stand right about there. Pat there. I need one more. Thank you, Bradley, for stepping forward and volunteering.
I feel like I've done this before.
Remember, this is the Army. Yes, you may well have endured this illustration before, where there's a 400-yard gap here in the line. And so, if Breckinridge and Breckinridge has got his two other brigades up here, if they were to attack right now, there's this 400-yard gap, which might mean what? Federals could get in there. Certainly they're not going to strike the line continuously. And so ideally what should happen? They should close that gap, right? And they should do it by, go back to your position there, Darrell. They should do it by basically Patrick Cleburne saying, right face, forward march, till they reach contact end front, and now there is no gap. So go back to 1. But no, what Daniel Harvey Hill, Patrick Cleburne, and John Cable Breckinridge decide to do is that when the advance is ordered, each of Cleburne's 3 brigades will half right face, not full right face, half right face, and then on the command forward march, you will march straight ahead, so you'll march this way, and look what happens. Yep, okay, so now back up again. And face west again. So, but what they really intended was half right face. And then Hill would command forward march. Come on forward, Helms. Yep. Okay, and look, it fills up the gap. And that's what they intended. And then they would front and attack. But that's not what happened. So go back to 1 again. So when the order is given to attack, Breckinridge jumps off. Cleburne has explained this to Lucius Polk, Sterling Alexander Martin Wood, and James Deschler. And when Cleburne gives the order to advance, Lucius Polk gives the command to his brigade, half right face. Deschler gives the command to his brigade, half right face. Sterling Alexander Martin Wood just waits a little bit, and then when the command forward is given, yeah, okay, that's good, so stop. Sterling Alexander Martin Wood went to the rear. Well, he certainly didn't go forward. So back to 1. What happened was that Polk, half right faced, marched off to the front. You went straight ahead. You can't do your echelon advance because you run into him. Yep. And this is what's going to mess up Cleburne's attack. And in the end, Wood, who we're going to deal with right now, on this ground, Wood's going to attack right here, hence the Alabama Monument. Wood is going to strike the Union line, his right flank against the front of Church's brigade and part of Palmer's division up in this direction. His center and left is going to come over this ground and go in that direction. But Deschler can't go forward. And then there's another problem. Deschler simply can't say front, forward march, because what's in front of him? Stewart. Yep. He can't go forward through Stewart. And what has now opened between Polk and Wood, a gap, what has now essentially opened between Wood and Deschler, a gap. And Cleburne's division winds up striking the Union line, 3 brigades, one at a time. Polk, then Wood, then Deschler. And to get Deschler into action, eventually, what Cleburne had to do was, as Wood was going back, he had to move Deschler from south to north and put Deschler in the same place that Wood had been. So the problems in command within in Cleburne's division is going to result in his division being able to strike only 1 brigade at a time. Yep. And this is Wood's last brigade command.
Left to my own accord.
And Deschler's
Well, yeah, it's Deschler, sure. Yeah, 1 second.
so yeah, the gap should have been closed up by simply moving Cleburne to the north, because they only get about half of it closed before Polk struck the front of the Union line, and they never get the other part of the gap closed up. And a gap has then opened between Polk and Wood, and Wood strikes the line further to the south, and Cleburne is furious. But it's going to result in this disaster that we're going to see. All of Wood should have struck the front of the Union line to the north of us up here, but instead, Wood's brigade is basically going to strike the Union line with its center about right where? It's Crochet in the Union line. And so his right regiments, the 15th Mississippi Sharpshooters and the 32nd and 45th Mississippi, they're going to strike the front. But the 45th Alabama, the 16th Alabama, and the 33rd Alabama are going to come over this rise right here. Of course, what's this going to cause Turchin to begin to do? Refuse. Yep, refuse his flank, and they're going to start putting fire into the Alabamans to try to come over the ground here. But Wood is going to go over this crest and that way. Of course, some of them are going to be halted and stopped here. The 15th Mississippi Sharpshooters and the 32nd and 45th Mississippi, they're just going to be stopped in front of Turchin's brigade there.
And not just in front, they're going to fall back behind that rise,
that
and
low
you'll
rise,
see
yeah.
a fairly sheltered position.
Where the Deschler shell pyramid is.
Yeah. So for much of this fight, they won't even be engaging Turchin's front except sporadically.
When Wood's replaced after the battle, does he get some kind of like inoffensive rear area job, or is he just basically sent home?
No, he's assigned as a garrison
Yeah,
commander.
he's reassigned to a garrison in Alabama. I don't remember where.
I think it's back in. I think it's in Tuscaloosa.
Could be.
Yeah, I'd want to check that again.
But
Hey Jim.
but we know from correspondent from a headquarters sergeant in the brigade that he leaves very precipitously and with no good feelings.
Why did they pick that method to close that gap? That just seems overly complicated when you're trying to launch an attack. Why did they? That doesn't make any sense.
In theory, it's faster.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And
Forward and moving to
remember the time pressure that they're under now. They're hours late on Bragg's attack plan. And so now we're getting this constant pressure, go forward. Breckinridge has attacked ahead of Cleburne and is already starting to engage up there around the McDonald House. Cleburne doesn't have time to rearrange the lines. D.H. Hill is of no help whatsoever, as far as I can tell. And so Hill's report is very interesting. Hill blames the disposition of the troops, the lack of reconnaissance, the faulty understanding of the federal defenses. He blames a whole series of things, all of which he's responsible. But in any case, we're going to focus on Wood, and we're going to witness the effect of the fire of the Crochet, especially as we get out further out there.
So Wood's brigade is now going to break, not to the rear yet, but it's going to break in 2/5, 3/5, and some are going to be trying to conduct a long-range firefight with Turchin's men here. The rest are going to do what we do, of course, extending on to the south. And Wood's left is north of Bates' right. Wood advances in that space between those bait tablets where we were and where we are now. When they're actually pulling back, and when bait is going forward. Is going to come over the crest of the low rise that we walked along, and as I said, he is going to pass between the right of bait and the federal line. But remember, when if we were to go due east from here, we would not come to those bait tablets. We'd have to do what to get to those bait tablets? Actually veer a little bit to the south, because he's got a wheel to be able to get up onto the crest to then make the advance. And so that bait refusing his right flank a little bit to protect it against the Federals' Turchin actually leaves a space through which the center and left of Wood's brigade can advance to come out here into this field. And they're actually going to get a little bit further in advance of where we are right now.
So the 3 Alabama regiments, first of all, ignore those cannon that line the road there. Those are September 19th guns. I know they look very menacing, and if we stepped out of the woods here as Alabamans, we would be shredded by them, but they're not here. Those are September 19th. But you do see that line of artillery and infantry monuments lining the road. Those are here on the morning of the 20th. And so when Wood's 3 Alabama commands move out, following the track that we sort of followed, they move out here into the field, they're now taking fire from that whole arc, that whole line. No one else has come out here. So essentially an entire federal division is shooting at them. And there's only half of Bates Brigade, so perhaps half of Wood's Brigade. So perhaps 700-800 men make it out into Poe Field here. They don't get as far as the Lafayette Road. They don't advance in really an organized fashion as 3 regiments. They kind of make individual movements across the field until they reach a point where they falter and they can't go forward.
Didn't the 16th get to the road and have to hide under the fence that was there?
Some of them do get to the road, but not as an organized formation. I don't.
This is Bates, though. This is Bates Brigade.
We're still on Wood.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Bate will get further, and so will other troops. But Wood, well, he can't go any further. And so that his men start to fall back, and he's also realized that he's lost the other half of his brigade, and at this point he has largely disappeared from the front line. He's wandering back there, either looking for the Mississippi half of his brigade, and as he's coming forward again, he encounters the Alabamans retreating, and that takes him down to Bates' brigade, where he asks Bate to come forward and support him, coordinate a second effort.
Yeah, the commander of the left regiment of Wood's brigade, the 33rd Alabama, writes, I received an order from General Wood to move forward and keep in line with the 16th Alabama, which is to his right. Previous to the time, Deschler's brigade had moved to the right. That's because they can't go forward, and so Deschler has, Wood has actually advanced now further, and Deschler is going to have to go behind. And Brown's brigade was near me on the left. That's of Stewart's division. After moving forward about 200 yards, I received a general volley of small arms from the enemy's line. At this point, the 16th Alabama halted. On a line with it, I halted my regiment. Here my company of skirmishers that had covered my front in the whole advance came in, having driven the enemy's skirmish line back to the main line. Near my line in front was a fence covering the whole of my regiment at the edge of the field, except the right company. The enemy's line of battle was distant about 275 yards. Well, from the edge of the woods, add that to it, behind barricades. In this position, I was subjected to a very severe enfilading fire from the right. In front was a low hill. A low hill protected me. Right where we are.
We're on the hill.
We're on the hill. Shortly after I halted, Brown's brigade came up on my left, and supporting it and very near it, in its rear, was Clayton's brigade, the right regiment of which lapped my whole regiment. I moved forward my regiment with these two brigades about 100 yards to the crest of the hill in my front. At this point, both brigades fell back, carrying with them many of my men. I continued to advance until I reached a house on the western side of the road, the Poe house. Some of his people are that far. They're probably at this point going more at an angle across the field. About 75 yards from the enemy's line, this house caught fire about the close of the engagement and burned down. At this point, I found myself with but 60 or 70 of my own men and very few, if any, of the other two brigades. With this squad, my men, and my colors, I fell back to the ravine where I had previously halted. After I had remained here half an hour, engaged in collecting my stragglers, I received an order from General Wood to rejoin the brigade, which was 700 or 800 yards further in the rear. This is the 33rd Alabama.
The 45th Alabama and the 16th.
16th. 16th and 45th.
Yeah, they have already fallen back. The 33rd stays out here the longest.
I got it done right here. Is it the 18th? I don't find
The
it.
16th Alabama and 18th Battalion combined, I believe.
So it's on the map. It's the 18th Alabama.
Well, right. The 18th Alabama on the map should actually be 16.
That's what I've always looked at. I've always been confused.
Yeah, that man, we might have found the typo.
That's taken years to figure that out.
No, I know what it is. It's the 16th Alabama and 18th Alabama Battalion, and they're operating combined.
But no, the 18th Alabama Battalion is with the 33rd.
They are?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That's always been confusing to me. Am I that dumb?
No. Maybe we printed that book too soon. I'd like to be able to
Hey, that was
reprint
the first edition too, so I always.
I've never caught that.
So the two regiments of Woods gets in front of Bates Brigade first when they're attacking in front of Bates Brigade.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, by the end of the action, we have.
Yeah, the whole line. But
We
at
have
first,
elements
when
of the 33rd all the way down.
when
by
Wood
the Powell
first
house.
comes on the scene, he gets in front. The way he's moving, he gets him because part of Bates Brigade
Bates-
is
yeah, Bates
refused. So that's
they'll
why
swing
they're
up.
able to get in front of him there.
Right. Yeah. There's more space between
Yeah.
the Federals and Bates' right, and so that allows Wood to come into that space more easily. And then when Bates finally is ordered to advance by Stewart, he conducts that basically half left wheel to get back in line with Brown and go forward.
And then Wood has fallen back by then.
Well,
Those two regiments anyway.
they fall back in the 45th and the 16th fall back before the 33rd does.
Yeah, but the two that came out here, they fall back and then Bate advances. That with
well, Bate is advancing as they're falling back,
Yeah.
but some of them are still out here fighting. So,
So how far does basic ground get?
well,
This side.
so Bate gets basically to this point. Brown and part of Clayton get across the road down there. Why doesn't Bate really get any further than here? Look where the fire is coming from. He's getting fire now even from his right rear, from his right front, and his front. But Brown can get further because he's really only dealing with fire directly from his front, and also he is screened. But look at the rise the Georgia Monument is on.
Yeah.
That limits the federal range. He comes over that rise into the low ground, and then actually look on the other side of the Lafayette Road where those Confederate cannon from later in the day are. There's a rise there that actually screens part of the federal line, we could even do that. We could go over there and walk on the federal line and notice what part of the federal line can cover what part of Poe Field, and what part of the federal line cannot cover what part of Poe Field. Not all of the Federals have got good coverage. Now, another thing we have to factor in: the road followed the natural surface of the ground. There's a 19-teens and 1930s embankment. That white car is running on that embankment right now. So we could walk over there and notice how high that road embankment is, go over the road and go back down that slope again. So we've got an embankment there to take out as well.
And that slag down there wasn't quite as low, is it?
Well,
Back there? I
it
heard that it would.
well, it only holds water because, again, we don't address the drainage issues here. I'm sorry?
It's put all the money on gravel.
Don't poke the ranger.
There's a culvert there under the road, which is supposed to drain the water from the other side of the road to this side of the road, across the field, on into the woods to join the drainage. That we avoid it. Some of you all can see how swampy it is in there. That's why we walked around this today. If we had done this when it hadn't been raining, we would have come straight through the woods. But it's real swampy and boggy in there. But all that water is supposed to run down there and run into that drainage, but it doesn't. And one of the big reasons it doesn't is, particularly in the fall, as the water runs from the other side of the road, what is it carrying? Leaves. And as the water loses power, it drops the leaves, and the leaves clog it up. And then as the leaves sit there, what happens next? They decompose and turn into soil. And then more leaves are deposited. We can walk down there. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. I'll show you the little mounds that are being developed.
Wait a minute, you should. No. You get lunch bags and you fill it with the dirt and you sell it for $5 a bag.
Yeah.
Alternatively, we could use Pat's suggestion, just call it Seminar Swamp.
Yes.
Yeah. But that should not be holding water like it is. So, but we have that road embankment there today. So
Let's talk a little bit about each of these brigade advances, because there are markers across the road for the high water marks of all of these brigades, including some from Bates. But by the time they're approaching the federal line, they're no longer in organized fashion. In Clayton's brigade, I think it's Ben Lane Posey who says that he gets near the Poe house with about 100 men from all of the elements of the 3 Alabama regiments in Clayton's brigade. And so later on, certainly when the Park Commission comes around and they start marking troop positions, they'll want to put their markers as far forward as they can. But the fact that some people maybe get across the road doesn't mean that the entire brigade got across the road and fully engaged the Federals. What's happening is that the formations are unraveling, and some individuals continue to press forward and other individuals are falling back. I know that, I recall from the accounts that I had when I was writing this, the ditch back here, the lower ground back here where the 33rd Alabama comes to rest and stays for a time, is also filled with stragglers from all of these elements, and they talk about how many men are gathered back here. As they advance, they become unraveled, and it can be a little bit confusing if you see the 1537 Tennessee marker over there and go, well, this is where the regiment got to. How many of the regiment got to? It's sort of like the markers on Hill 1 up there on Horseshoe Ridge, on Snodgrass Hill. You know, there's 20 men, 80 men. They're not, they're combat effective in that case, or even here, but they're no longer in numbers that can do any real damage to King's, Croxton, and Connell's brigades back there.
Yeah, Bates says, I was then ordered by General Stewart to advance and attack. My command received the order with a shout and moved upon the foe at a rapid gait. The battalion of sharpshooters was ordered to maintain its position at right angles to the line and check if possible, if not, to delay any movement in that direction, giving the earliest notice of the same. My right, as upon the previous evening, became hotly engaged almost the instant it assumed the offensive. It was subject to a most galling fire of grape and musketry from my right oblique in front, cutting down with great fatality the 20th Tennessee and the 37th Georgia at every step. Those are the 2 right regiments of his brigade, until they drove the enemy behind his defenses, from which, without support either of artillery or infantry, they were unable to dislodge him. General Deschler's brigade not having advanced, I called on General Cleburne, who was near my right and rear, for assistance, but he was having none. But he having none at his disposal which could be spared, I was compelled to retire the right wing of my brigade, or sacrifice it uselessly, fighting twice its numbers with an advantage of the hill and breastworks against it. I did so in good order, without indecent haste, and aligned it first in front, and then placed it in rear of our flimsy defenses, which they had constructed on that line back there. My left, the 58th Alabama and 15th and 37th Tennessee consolidated, the latter under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Frazier, Colonel Tyler having been wounded, being farther from the enemy's line than my right, did not so soon become engaged, neither at this time, subject to so severe a crossfire, proceeded steadily on and drove the enemy behind his works, which had been constructed the night previous, on the very spot we had driven him from, and maintained their position with dogged tenacity until the 20th Tennessee and 37th Georgia were put in position behind the barricade and the battalion of sharpshooters drawn in. The artillery of the enemy had ceased to play upon us, except at slow intervals, and with a part of Tyler's and Jones's commands having already returned, I dispatched Lieutenant Blanchard of my staff to ascertain their situation, who reported that he met them returning with the balance of their commands in good order. I placed them in position. I am unable to give as accurate an account of my left as of my right, for the reason that the right became first engaged, and the commanders of the 3 right regiments, the Caswell's Battalion of Sharpshooters, the 20th Tennessee, and the 37th Georgia, having been wounded the evening previous, devolving the commands on junior officers, I felt that my personal services were most needed there, which prevented my witnessing so as to give in detail the incidents connected with that portion of the field, the left of the brigade. Remember, I pointed out on the 4th Georgia Battalion Sharpshooters Monument who's in command? A lieutenant. Yep. And both the 37th Georgia and the 20th Tennessee had lost their regular commanders. The 20th Tennessee's commander was Colonel Thomas Benton Smith. He had been wounded on the 19th, and the man commanding the 20th Tennessee on the 20th is Major Shy. Ever hear of him? Shy's Hill. Yep, 20th Tennessee will be up there on Shy's Hill. Colonel Rudler of the 37th Georgia had been wounded, and Lieutenant Colonel Smith has command. And so Bate thinks those commanders are not as reliable as the ones who had been wounded the day before. And so where does Bate put the attention of his command? On his right. But what does that leave the units on his right, or on his left? Okay. Less supervision, yep, less direction from the brigade commanders.
So why then did Stewart go forward? Because there's a critical moment here in the battle. When Wood advances, A.P. Stewart's division is holding, and Wood goes past it, and Stewart doesn't go forward as well. Bragg's battle plan, of course, is that first the right wing attacks and drives the Federals, and then the left wing goes forward. But the mounting frustration of these delays and the failure of these attacks, by now General Breckinridge and his division have essentially become heavily engaged at the north end of the field, and they are even starting to be pushed back out. Federal infantry, one of the reserve brigade of this line, Vanderveer's brigade of Brannan's division, has been sent north to go help deal with that situation. Other Federals are turning their attention. Bragg is very frustrated, and at this point issues an order, or actually directs one of his staff officers to ride down the line,
Major Pollock B. Lee,
and start ordering divisions into action one at a time as you come to them. So he rides up to A.P. Stewart, the northernmost of the right wing of Longstreet's wing, and orders A.P. Stewart to go into action. And Stewart protests, says, I haven't received orders from Longstreet, and Major Lee says, no, these are Bragg's instructions to go forward. And that's what brings Stewart's division into the fight, just as Wood is falling back, just as Polk is stymied. And so instead of a massive Confederate attack of multiple divisions sweeping out of the woods all at once, we get this series of individual brigade movements, or at most 2 brigades at a time.
We can, or we can pick a, well, actually, from even right here, we can see a little bit of it. Look at the ground over there where the monuments are. You can't see the base of a couple of those monuments, and we do have to factor in a little bit of the building up of Poe Road, but there's actually a rise of ground just on the other side of the road between us and the Federal line. The Federal line over there a lot of those federal troops probably were firing more to the left or right front. Many of them talk about that, as opposed to directly in front because of the variations in the terrain. So.
Now the Federals will describe this as a series of frontal attacks. They will say they charged us 5 or 6 times. And it's not that each individual brigade is going forward 5 or 6 times. It's that pulse of brigades the uncoordination of these attacks. But again, as each brigade comes forward, steps out here, a whole line of fire gets to open up on them. I think it's Samuel McNair of 31st Ohio that says this is the easiest fight he was ever in. All you had to do was load and shoot. Until later. Yeah, it gets worse later. Yeah, but yeah, he's pretty happy with the morning.
Okay. Well, so which axis do you want to? Look, we can't see the ancient monument over there. The town farmstead was on a little rise. Yeah, we see top of the monument. More importantly, they can't see us. And more importantly, they can't shoot at us right here.
Now kneel or lie down.
Yeah. Yep.
And they're by and large kneeling behind barricades.
And so you might wonder, how the heck is it that any Confederate got across the road here? Well, it's this type of terrain thing that allows them. The terrain, the rises in front of you, this one directly in front of us, and then the one on the other side of the road where the Poe farmstead was, actually shield an advancing force from the fire of those Federals over there. And that's going to allow them, in addition to the buildings of the farmstead themselves, it's going to give cover for the Confederates to be able to cross the road. So let's be some of Brown and Clayton's men, and see if we can attack the Yankee line on the other side of the road.
When you get up further to the road on that last little rise, you get a fight full of double shot.
Look right here. As we come up to the crest. I just remembered something. Look right here, immediately to the west of me. You can see the monument to Battery D, 1st Michigan Light Artillery. You can see its 2 10-pound parrots right on either side. Church has got all 6 guns, but in 1863 there are the buildings of the Poe farmstead, the Poe house, probably a barn or shed building, some chicken coops, pigsties, a fenced-in garden. There would be some things that would at least obstruct the view, as well as the fire to a degree. Yep, but then you've got Battery C, 1st Ohio Light Artillery over here, and they can certainly fire right here. But we've got some cover right now, and come on, boys!
Yeah. Oh, I think that little rectangle yeah.
But one of the things that I have subsequently learned since the last time I would have looked is that that would have been a legislative committee, not members of the legislature, but a legislatively appointed committee.
Yeah.
And there may be records, but in the legislative records, and basically not well cataloged. This is the case with a lot of federal records. Anything associated with Congress, are in congressional records. The National Archives cares for them, but it is the historian's office of the House and Senate who are actually responsible for them, and you actually have to have their permission to access. I talked about the road right over here being built up on an embankment. Well, here it's on a cut. So try to imagine, kind of right here from the ground that Dave and I and some of us are standing on, try to imagine this going just right over and meeting the top of the cut on the other side of the road. And the road at the time, now it might, because it's going over a rise, it might have been depressed a little bit into the ground, but not a lot, not on a cut like this. Nobody mentions anything about a sunken road at Chickamauga. So try to imagine this ground just sloping up a little bit and the crest being still ahead of you there. So we're going to have to walk across the road and up that embankment, but we should just be able to go right straight across.
I haven't mentioned anything about a sunken road at Shiloh either.
Of the Poe farmstead. Larkin Poe will come back many years later and identify the site of the house. The fences, the outbuildings, the main house itself of the Poe farmstead, and we really don't know a great deal about the Poe farmstead. Poe was only a renter, a tenant. He did not own the land, and they'd only lived here a short time. They are not here on the 1860 census, and then the battle is going to occur here. So we don't know a great deal about the farmstead, but the buildings of the farmstead provide cover, and in addition to the terrain that we've just looked at, it allows Confederates to get across the road here in amongst these buildings. And just 75 yards at the most in front is the Federal line. Now, if you're a Confederate a few men from the 33rd Alabama of Wood's brigade, probably a few of Bates' men, definitely men of Brown and Clayton. You get in amongst these buildings, what are you going to use them for? Cover. Yep. And where's the enemy? Over here. And they are taking, these Confederates begin firing at the Federals behind their fortifications. They're in front. Now if you're one of those Federals over there, what do you think?
Set the buildings on fire.
Yeah, set the buildings on fire. And Captain Church, from this short distance, is going to fire some shells into the house and set it on fire. Now, yes, there are Confederates acting belligerently against those Yankees over there. But who else do you think was in that house?
Probably Federal wounded.
Yeah, Federal wounded from the day before. Maybe even some captured Confederate wounded from the day before.
From Stewart division.
Mostly men probably thought to be so badly injured that they're going to die, and hence that they were not evacuated to another field hospital. And now there's been some fighting going on the morning, and what's probably made their way to this shelter? Some more wounded. And there are some wounded. There are probably some dead bodies. And And so when Church starts putting shells into that building, some of those who die from the explosion of the shells or are injured from the explosion of the shells are probably some wounded Union soldiers. And then the building catches on fire.
Is there a reason why they took that line instead of this line through here? They covered this higher ground better.
Well, primarily because the woods got thicker there, and you've got cover and concealment with the woods. In actuality, along quite a bit of the Union line, you've got Union troops in a reverse slope defense where there is some higher ground in their front.
I just wondered why they took that.
There they would be right in the middle of the field.
Yeah.
Here they would have the whole field as their open field of fire.
Okay. And if they were on the crest here, they're that much closer to the woods on the other side that the enemy could use for cover and concealment. Think about down there at the Poe Farm, or at the Brotherton Farm, where the Union line at the gap was at the edge of the field, but there's the crest out in front of it.
Yeah, this line actually curves and is intended to connect with that line.
Supposed to follow that line.
Yeah.
When you follow the path through the woods here down to Brotherton Field, that's where you come out.
And so the Federals, along much of this line, you'll find places where they're essentially in a reverse slope defense, where they're back of the highest ground. But occupying the higher ground is going to put them out in the open, and they don't have the advantage of cover and concealment.
No, we've already heard numerous times how they chase the Federal skirmishers back to their line of works. That's where those Federal skirmishers are.
Well, yeah.
Out either forward into the woods or even possibly here in the field. Wherever they can identify the approach and give enough warning.
That would probably be the tree line.
Well, if the Confederate skirmishers allowed them that. Down on the Brotherton Farm, the Union skirmish line was supposed to be along the fences of the Lafayette Road. But the Colonel, Francis Bartleson, was very aggressive, and he pushes his skirmishers into the woods on the other side of the road. I can't think of any source right offhand from Connell or Cruxton that is specific about where their skirmishers lie.
No, not that I know.
Yeah. But they do have skirmishers out, and the Confederates have to push them back. But the Confederates use the cover and concealment of the buildings to get this close, but they're not going to get any further because of the strength of that Federal line. And then the buildings get on fire, and
even the Confederates that get here, I mentioned Captain Posey of the 36th Elevator, I think. He says that he is here with a mixed force from all three regiments, about 100 men, all three regiments of Clayton's brigade. So it's not an organized group. It's not three regiments of troops. It's just the forward edges.
So where are we at in relation to when they come through down here and make the drive through?
Well, at this moment, we are still ahead of that. So we would be maybe 10:45, 11 o'clock.
Yeah, about an hour before.
Does this have any bearing on moving woods out of the line? Just fighting here?
Well, Stewart, not an hour ahead of time, because there's not that much time between Stewart going in and Longstreet learning of Pollock Lee and saying I better do something to prevent further disorganization. So maybe at most 30 minutes.
But enough time for not only Stewart's men to fall back, but the next brigade, McNair.
Right, but they're not going to come until a little after 11. So it's
they attack and
they're repulsed, and they're right.
So it's not until this is the tricky part of this is the hardest part. Certainly when I was writing it, and I think certainly to explain it, is sometimes things seem to take forever. It doesn't help that nobody really agrees on time. There's a general agreement on some sides, unless you ask George Thomas. And then suddenly things seem to happen very quickly. You know, the timing on the tablets, what's the timing on the bait tablet? It's like 10:45. Is it 11?
11.
Yeah.
And that was all created by the commission,
Yeah.
what was it, Boynton and that group?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
With the confusion of road orders and when he got what, does that not still possibly tie into this?
When Stewart receives the order,
Roasters,
oh,
roasters.
yeah.
When his confusion of he gets.
Well, his order is timed 10:45. Now, you know, we not everybody was issued the same smartphone, so they're hitting different cell towers. So you know, his order is timed 10:45, but is that 10:40 or 10:50 or even 10:30?
at least his time is consistent internally to his headquarters.
Right. And
It always, the time frame seemed like it might somehow be.
well, it is because one of the big reason why Brannan does not move under Thomas's order to move is that that Stewart attacks him, and he can't move, and so we've got to factor when Stewart's attack begins and strikes the federal line into this timeline of how long does it take for all of this to unfold. So,
Brannan is Connell's brigade reports that they're already starting to depart when this attack, when the latest attack happens, which has to be A.P. Stewart's attack, and they're ordered back into line. Brannan and Reynolds confer, and they decide that they can't go. But at that point they neglect to send someone to Rosecrans to tell him that circumstances have changed again. From the Confederate point of view, after Pollock Lee tells Stewart to go forward, Stewart sends word to Longstreet that he's been ordered forward. Pollock Lee rides down to the next division, which is Bushrod Johnson, and either one of Longstreet's people has arrived in a timely fashion, or Bushrod Johnson also sends back. That's not clear. There's not enough detail on that. But Longstreet then is able to countermand the rest of Pollock Lee's effects. So none of the other divisions go forward. But very shortly thereafter, Longstreet orders the whole line forward. So how long is the pause that Longstreet imposes on the attack so that he can make sure that everyone advances at once instead of one division or, God forbid, one brigade at a time? We don't know. And no one...
So all the divisions were supposed to move at once, and then after this breakdown, it turned more into
Longstreet's vision was to push his central column forward, and the two flanking divisions, Stewart and Hindman, all at once.
Okay.
He wanted everybody to advance simultaneously, much like what he tried to do at 2nd Manassas. He wants a coordinated attack.
But Stewart, his Brown and Clayton, they're more oriented this way when they come into the field.
No,
they're coming straight this way.
Across?
Yep.
So when the house caught fire, did the Confederates, I mean, they were here, did they know there was wounded soldiers there? Did they try to get them out, or they were too busy ducking?
I've never seen an account of anybody trying to save the wounded from the house. After the battle, there are people who remark seeing the charred human remains in the burned down house. Now, whether those are charred remains of a soldier who had been killed the day before and his body left there, or had been injured the day before or that morning and had died before the fire, whether they were still alive at the time that the fire occurred.
How big was the house? Like the Brotherton house?
Probably like the Brotherton house, but we don't know for certain. So.
It was one of those mansions you see up at Kennesaw.
Yeah, not quite. So, but the fragmenting of Brown and Clayton's brigades, the casualties, the burning of the house, all of this then is going to cause Brown and Clayton to withdraw back to the other side of the road, and then it's the timeline thing again. Exactly when did that happen? How long is that going on? But when Longstreet gives the order to Hood and Hindman to advance, and when Hood and Hindman advance, the right front brigade of Johnson's division is McNair's brigade, and they extend far enough to the north that they will strike Connell's line and be repulsed by, or at least the left of McNair is going to be repulsed, and the center and the right of McNair will be repulsed, and the center and left will basically stop and go back to get reorganized. McNair will come forward again, but at the same time, Fulton's brigade will begin to actually penetrate through the gap, and that becomes increasingly evident to Connell, who then tries to begin to react, and by that.
Yeah, sometime between Stewart's falling back, the end of Stewart's attack, and the beginning of McNair's attack, the lost order, the infamous order has arrived. The gap has been created. Samuel Beatty's brigade moves out from the south and starts moving north. Buell's brigade,
Barnes.
Barnes. Barnes' brigade, Harker's brigade. They all start moving out, and so when McNair attacks and is repulsed, there's no longer a continuous line south through to Brotherton Field, and that allows Fulton to penetrate, but also allows Bushrod Johnson to maneuver the support brigade under Gregg. They'll come through and they'll help turn this flank, and so McNair goes forward a second time, and Gregg is now operating on this flank, and suddenly all these guys know that their line has been rolled up. Now, interestingly enough, McNair and Gregg keep going that way. It will finally come down to Henry Benning's brigade, that line of Georgia monuments there, that will come into the field in their wake and start or finish off the unraveling of these two brigades, Connell and Croxton. And that's
and Sam Beatty.
Well, yeah, Sam Beatty is
back behind them. It gets all tangled up.
So that's ultimately what undoes this line. It's been a very powerful line. It's been successful.
Benning's really the fourth line.
Yes.
Column. So he must basically get a right wheel.
Yes.
They're much close to a right wheel.
Yeah. He comes in on the flank of the lines.
And there is a fairly dramatic federal defense. One year we just did the federal side of Poe Field. The 82nd Indiana, which tries to counterattack. The Federals trying to stabilize their line, 31st Ohio, and a fairly dramatic fight for these artillery batteries. The 4th Michigan Company Battery D of the 1st Michigan, also known as the 4th Michigan Battery, get 3 of their 3 or 5.
Well,
They get 5 out of here, and then they lose 2 more.
They only get off the field with 2. So yeah, they get
Yeah.
5 out of here, and they.
But they lose a gun. The whole line starts to become unraveled. But A.P. Stewart has no role in that. Sam Wood's brigade has no role in this.
They're all back there.
They're all
Still back by then.
They're all retired back there. They're trying to recover. So the division that was supposed to cover Longstreet's flank attack, he had his column, which turns out to be 5 lines, and then he has Stewart with 2 brigades forward and 1 brigade in reserve, and Hindman essentially oriented the same way initially. So he's got a total of 11 brigades. That's good.
Well, it's 12 in this formation.
Yeah.
And then, well, no, I'm sorry. It's 17. It's 14 in this formation. 8 plus 6.
Right. That's right. But the northern flank has already been shattered by their fruitless attacks here. It's hard to speculate, really impossible to speculate very much, but we can at least grasp a better sense of what would happen if this whole line were attacked at once. For one thing, each of the brigades that comes forward would not be subject to individual converging fire from the whole line as it comes forward, and so it's quite possible they would have suffered less. It's quite possible that the advances over through those swales would have brought them closer in a better organized fashion and maybe delivered a charge, especially if things were still progressing on the southern end of this line the way they progressed historically.
Dave, did they do much damage? Soften them up at all? Or was it just a bit angle, shooting high?
The federal casualties are well, Sam McNair, like I said this is the easiest fight he's been in.
There are not very many casualties along this line. They're well protected, and the biggest thing about the field fortifications is it just pulled those guys down low on the ground, and which means just more of the enemy's fire goes over their heads.
Hazen contrasts his experience in Brockfield is losing something on the order of 400 men on September 19th in a stand-up fight. Even the hasty works that he has up there along Battle Line Road where we park are something like 15 or 20 men.
Well, these press works, are they it's like stuff drug in the way, or did they actually, because they didn't actually build anything?
Don't think of
they just drug
trenches with headlogs and no time for that. It's
what axes would have been available would have been used to cut down some trees. Each limber of an artillery battery has an axe on it, and so Church, and depending upon how close his battery wagon and traveling forge were, Church could potentially have 14 axes available. And up on the Battle Line Road line, there are a couple of references. One from the 4th Indiana Battery. After they had used their axes through much of the night, they then loaned them to the 38th Indiana early in the morning. And so what is suggested is that the most extensive field fortifications might have been in front of the artillery batteries, because they literally have a tool with which to work.
Everybody else has to rely on deadfalls.
When did the entrenching tool come about? Was that after like Spanish-American War or before World War I? Then like in that time period?
Yeah, true entrenching tools not until the 20th century, but the Army, seeing what the soldiers are doing in 1863, the Army begins to increasingly carry shovels, picks, and axes along with the troops. Rosecrans, in his orders for the advance in August, has ordered that each division wagon train carry some entrenching tools, and I think he even uses numbers, and I don't remember what they are.
I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, but he's telling them to put tools in the wagons, but the problem is the wagons are all on the other side of Missionary Ridge. They're not right with them. But what both armies recognize over the winter is the soldiers want something to fight from behind, and so, okay, let's give them tools with which to really build something. And when the two armies march out to clash in the spring of 1864, both armies have brigade level tool wagons carrying.
Like a pioneer brigade for each division, so just almost kind of like about that.
I didn't hear the first part of your question.
Would it be sort of like a organized unit within the division, like a pioneer brigade?
No, not a pioneer brigade.
So they just had extra wagons.
But no, they had a tool wagon.
Okay.
For each brigade.
But no one was designated as the main
once
people
again,
to use those tools.
Right, it varies.
I have General Peter Osterhaus's returns for the 1st Division 15th Corps, where he meticulously lists out the number of pioneers present in each brigade, and it's typically around 100 men.
But their sole job is not to dig entrenchments. They've got a lot of other things to do, improve roads, clear roads, and the like. The tools are just for the men to use.
And they're passed out to